Hey, Liz.
Hi.
Hi.
Here we are.
Here we are.
We love this little place to gather and chat because it's beautiful. My mom's house on Conway Lake.
Yeah.
And here we are. It feels like we snuggle in.
Yeah.
And then we can...
We've got our water.
Hydrating.
Yes.
Important. But also, we've had some of our best chats in this little
I know, and
space.
we always talk about how, man, we should have been filming that. Like, every time.
So here we are doing it.
Here we are doing
Progress.
That. Yes.
So one of the topics that has been on our list of wanting to discuss is, really everything about menopause. Because in our practices, we have seen that it's a forgotten era of a woman's life. Like, they just aren't educated, supported, prepared for that. Visible.
At all.
Right. And that, to us, has been identified as a real problem in the care of women, people who will go through menopause through their lifespan. That's true of a lot
Menopausees.
Many women would not call it easeful.
No.
Menopausees.
No.
But it's true of many stages of life.
Right.
Through a lifespan. But in particular, this demographic is an area of focus and of particular interest for us.
Mm-hmm.
So one subcategory of menopause that seems to be front of mind for a lot of women is the changes in body weight.
Right.
The redistribution of body weight, the physical and aesthetic changes that are experienced. So we have some things to say about that.
We do have a lot of things to say about that.
Things to say.
Pages of things to say. We'll try to...
Nicole has 7 pages of notes, so everybody buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah. And so first, just maybe setting the scene, what is menopause?
Yeah.
We've talked about it in some posts, but it's a big hormonal shift. So the hormonal landscape is really turning on its head. We go from this cyclic ovulatory process through perimenopause where, it's chaos. And then menopause is sort of the ovaries go night-night. Where there's really no eggs left or very few eggs left. And so the brain is sending out the signal, release more eggs. And there's so few that there's no longer any response to that signal. And so we're not making estrogen in our ovaries anymore. And when we're not making estrogen, we can't ovulate. And so we're not making progesterone either. So it's characterized by estrogen proficiency and the absence of progesterone. Because the only way we make progesterone in the body is post-ovulation in the ovary.
So it's a cascading effect where there's distinct steps in the ovulatory process. We also made a post about this that does outline this. And I think it's, as we've talked about, it is the lack of understanding about even the ovulatory cycle makes it hard to understand then the changes that occur perimenopause and menopause. So because it's
post-menopause,
there's all totally
distinct phases that are all characterized by different hormonal changes.
Right. But sometimes even just starting with understanding of that ovulatory cycle, so then you can appreciate hormonally what's actually happening with the changes.
It explains everything. Is the neat thing.
And isn't that such a great antidote to sometimes the loneliness, the powerlessness, the feeling of irrelevance? It's that's why.
There's a why.
Physiologically.
There's a why there.
Yes.
There's a very clear why.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's such a tragedy that women feel alone in this process because in various forms and various pathways, every woman goes through it. It doesn't always look the same, but it's what a tragedy that we feel alone in a process that is essentially ubiquitous for all women. So, that first step, I think, as we are trying to affect is the learning. Right. So,
and in the body weight conversation specifically, I think we're going to sort of focus in on menopause and post-menopause.
Yes.
Because that's it's a really easy hormonal environment to understand and to explain the reasons why behind so many of the symptoms, and specifically with body weight. So we're not talking about perimenopause where hormones are all over the place, which,
it's going to be a totally different topic.
But we're talking about the hallmark of postmenopause being estrogen deficiency and the why there in terms of body weight specifically.
And what you just said is the estrogen deficiency leads to then progesterone deficiency because there's a cascading effect. Is that right? Or is that...
You can think about it that way.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Good.
It's really there's no eggs left.
There's no eggs. So estrogen and progesterone are like, we don't have a job because there isn't...
Right. Yeah, they've done their job.
They've done their job.
They've done their job. They deserve their rest. Give them a break already.
We now call it restrogen. It's a new hormone.
The restrogen phase.
The restrogen.
Oh my god, that's good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so can we, in light of this hormonal shift, understand the why behind some of the weight redistribution?
Yeah.
Lots of women find it like concentrates more in the midsection versus the hips and thighs.
Let's talk about what estrogen does.
Oh, great.
In the body.
Perfect.
So estrogen is an anabolic hormone, meaning it's a building hormone. It drives metabolism. It's responsible in large part for the building, the growth and repair of muscle. Mm-hmm. So if estrogen is doing that, and then all of a sudden we have estrogen deficiency, we're not going to be doing that as much, right? Mm-hmm. So what very often happens is a wasting of muscle. So there's less muscle mass in the body, and muscle
atrophy.
Mm-hmm. And muscle drives our metabolism. Our basal metabolic rate is intimately connected with how much muscle mass we have.
And what is a basal metabolic rate?
Great question, Liz. So it's essentially like how much energy your body burns throughout in a normal day without assuming any additional exertion. So like just sitting here, how much energy, how many calories it takes for your body to function. Mm-hmm. And muscles need a lot of energy. Mm-hmm. And so people who have higher muscle mass are going to have a higher metabolic rate. And so when you are used to having estrogen in your body your whole life, and post-menopause, you have some that's made in other areas of the body, but it's really a state of estrogen deficiency. Mm-hmm. You're going to have muscle wasting unless you change what you're doing in your day-to-day. Mm-hmm. How you're moving your body, what you're putting in your body.
Is there a specific type of body movement that
we'll get there. I think our followers know we're big proponents of resistance strength training, which is, very evidence-based to alleviating a lot of the symptoms of postmenopause and certainly to increasing your metabolic rate.
Right.
Because you're going to build muscle. Mm-hmm. So that's what estrogen's doing in large part. It has a lot of other functions in the body, but when we're talking specifically about body weight, I think that's one of the biggest factors that we want to think about.
Mm-hmm. So related to body weight, we lose muscle mass.
Yeah.
So
metabolism is slower. So given the same amount of movement of the body and same amount of calories in, you will probably see an increase in weight.
You'll pack some on.
Yeah. And not only that,
because of the metabolism.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, the North American Menopause Society, NAMS, which is like the North Star when it comes to menopause stuff, has some really interesting ways of like tweaking, like in my mind, sort of like tweaking what's happening to fit a different narrative of like, this change in metabolism is very well established in the science. Mm-hmm. And NAMS says that weight gain of menopause is related to lifestyle, is related to diet, is related to more sedentary lives. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like that's, it's like, maybe that's true that there's not a weight gain, but there is a weight redistribution that we'll get to. Yeah. And that's clear. That is menopause related.
Right. So do you feel like them saying that it further sort of communicates subtly to women that it's your responsibility and your fault,
figure it out.
You have to figure it out.
Yeah.
And
this is because of you.
Right. And we're a proponent of lifestyle changes and lifestyle
and we'll get into
responsibility for sure.
Yeah.
So we don't disagree that at any stage of life, in any capacity, like taking care of your basics, sleep, hydration, nutrition, exercise, community, and relationship, that's our responsibility as a human being. But in this case, the snoring dog also. Speaking of sleep,
our fancy microphone's gonna pick that up.
Speaking of sleep, sleeping dog, sleeping. But what that messaging is leaving out is the conversation around what are the physiological changes to explain this.
Yeah.
There are physiological changes happening in your body that you really, you can't outrun those. They're happening.
Right. And just because hormone replacement therapy doesn't improve that weight redistribution or doesn't improve that weight gain that happens.
In the research, that's what they say.
In the randomized controlled trials, hormonal replacement therapy doesn't move the needle. Mm-hmm. But that's like missing the point entirely. Yeah. This is the experience of so many women of, I've done nothing different. I'm doing the same thing. This was never a problem for me. And for a medical society to just say like, sorry, no, you're wrong. Yeah. Like that's gaslighting. Yeah. And there's there's so much physiology to explain what happens to people in their bodies as they move through menopause. And it's not just age, it's a hormonal impact.
Right. Yeah. And it can happen at a pretty broad range of ages.
And that body composition shift happens during menopause regardless of age.
Right.
So whether menopause is surgical, chemical, whether it's early onset menopause or, the average, in the 50s, it's that impact is seen in a physical level.
So when they say you're just aging.
You're aging. You're not moving your body as much. Yeah. You're eating more comfort foods. It's like,
yeah, you must be eating more comfort foods. She's like, I'll live on salads. What are you doing? I love comfort foods, but I don't even let myself have it.
I know.
Yeah. So I feel like even the best intentioned practitioners still buy into some messaging that is really damaging, particularly for women. There is an overarching sense of just like, women will figure it out. Women will figure it out.
Right.
There's lots of examples.
And so the internalization is like, what's wrong with me?
Exactly.
What's wrong?
No.
Your body's changing. And some of that, as we'll get into, is protective.
Yes. Yeah. While we're on that note, and then we'll go back to the science and the physiology, I have a little story that I think applies here.
I love that.
Okay, great. This is actually a fun story for us on this platform because it's really when the inception or the idea of reverence came to me. And it was probably 5-ish years ago. And I was working, as I do with women in PT. And it's not always, in a closed room. Some people think pelvic floor therapy is in a closed room and you just do Kegels and that's it. No, there's a lot of like, we're moving weight and we're like working on mechanics and what have you. And I had this woman. And this is not a new experience for me by any means, but it really landed in this moment. And I had this woman, she was lovely. And she was there working on some pelvic things. She was probably 60, 65. And Post-menopause. And this is like, if you've ever been to physical therapy clinics are like plastered with mirrors everywhere. And so very commonly, and almost only women, oh my God, I don't want to look at myself. Oh, can we not do the mirror? Ooh, geez, is that what I look like? Ugh, God, I can't. Which even became normalized to me, where I was just like, oh, you kind of laughed it off. I myself have those moments for sure, because I work in a room that's like literally mirrors on all sides. So I'm like, oh, whoa, is that what's happening right now? But then as I matured, I guess, in my career, I was like, no, stop that. Like, no. Yeah. So I had this one patient and we were using the mirror to work on the concept of hip hinging. And it's a tricky biomechanic for some people. And so I put her in front of a mirror because it's such a wonderful teaching tool. That's why we have them. And I'm kind of going through the mechanics. I'm demonstrating. I'm kind of trying to point out different landmarks on her body to look at. And it takes me a minute to register that she's like near tears and her face looks stricken. And I say, are you okay? And she said, I hate the way I look. I need to do something else.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't in passing and kind of like this thing that all women think they're expected to say in front of a mirror that's like, oh. So we sat down and we just talked for a second, and she just couldn't separate even her disdain for her appearance from the useful tool for her pain or for her process. And it hit me. I got like angry on her behalf and on every woman's
so
behalf.
Much internalized misogyny.
Totally.
Yeah.
And really, it's like this expectation that we approximate this aesthetic ideal that is such a small needle to thread. And it's impossible because part of the expectation of that ideal is youth. And so nobody's like winning that battle, right? And so she felt unattractive and like overweight and just like felt not worthy. And so in that moment, I was like, this is real. I feel it often as a woman. And the research shows that girls as young as 9 start to compare the way they look to other girls. And so it is a cultural and systemic thing that's deeply rooted. But in my mind, I was like, what is happening on the inside is so much more interesting than what is happening on the outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, so many women are not connecting with that because they are obsessed with maintaining some approximation to this aesthetic ideal because they've been conditioned to be.
Right.
They're not relevant, useful.
From the age of 9.
Yeah, they're not worthy unless they are attractive in some way. And so...
Which is pretty unique to the West, I
feel
is. Like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, women, especially older women, elder generations are revered.
Keepers. Yeah.
Yes. And I think, like, we could do that even on our small level of our community if we allowed women to actually connect with the thing that they should draw wisdom from, which is the experience of their body, the experience of their self on a deep and, like, internal level. And menopause, almost all women postmenopausal have the disdain for looking in the mirror. But also, like, to kind of bring it back to what you're talking about with, like, redistribution of body weight, the way that happens during menopause is antithetical to the way society has defined attractiveness.
Right.
And that's a problem.
It's a big problem.
It's a big problem. And I think that we believe that women are going to be the ones that have to fundamentally reject that.
It's always the women.
It always is. I know.
Rejecting.
But it's for their own benefit in this case.
Yeah.
So,
for sure.
Anyway, that's like...
It's a great
long story.
Enter reverence.
Enter reverence.
Enter.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was sort of one of the moments where I was like, we can do better for women, for all people, really. Like, to unveil some of this, like, anatomy, physiology, for men to understand better too, for everybody. We have transgender, like, there's a lot of need to understand some of these hormonal processes.
For sure.
Okay. Sorry. Not sorry. Why am I apologizing?
Oh,
I fundamentally reject that.
Misogyny. That's why.
None of us are immune.
Yeah.
So, weight gain.
So weight gain and also weight change. Just like the way that a postmenopausal body looks oftentimes is different than a premenopausal body. And one of the reasons for that is relative androgen dominance. So what that means is, estrogen is the dominant hormone for the most part in the reproductive years, and then that plummets. And you have testosterone and androgens, which are sort of male pattern hormones, reproductive hormones. Those essentially stay stable. So you have this relative dominance of male reproductive hormones. And so,
it's an important point because I think a lot of people don't realize that we think of testosterone as male and estrogen as female. We don't realize that both genders have percentages of both.
Right. And it's the balance that shifts.
It's the balance that shifts.
So now you have that redistribution of weight more from the hips and the legs and the breasts to the midline, to the abdomen, and that truncal obesity. Receding hairline, hair growth in certain places, that peach fuzz that older women get. It's a testosterone thing. And so, and so that can be troubling or bothersome, and that's okay. It's, we don't need to like tell people that they should be fine with that. It's okay to normalize the freak out of my body's changing, but understanding the why is helpful. And beyond that, that shift in increased adiposity or fat tissue is kind of your body taking care of you a little bit, because so fat becomes really one of the main sites of estrogen production post-menopause, because say goodbye to the ovaries. They were doing that job forever. They're not doing it anymore.
So they're the main producer of estrogen throughout your life, and then you have
and then you have your adrenal glands and your fat tissue.
Oh, adrenal glands are real busy in our stressed out society.
They're so busy. So one thing you do is support your adrenals. You can support your adrenals, and maybe that helps with body weight. But like our adrenals are shot. They're so stressed out. We're so tapped out.
Because they also regulate cortisol, which is a main stress hormone. So they're just busy.
They're busy guys.
Yeah.
So our fat is trying to lend a hand. And so some amount of weight gain, 5 to 10 pounds, is going to be your body supporting your hormonal environment.
Right. It's trying to accommodate for the lack of estrogen coming from the ovaries.
It's protective. It's supportive. And so thinking about it that way, I mean, for me, that was like a big, what a reframe. What a reframe.
What a reframe.
And not that we're promoting obesity.
No.
This is like, a small amount of 5 to 10 pound weight gain, weight shift. That's support, your bones and your brain rely on estrogen to exist.
Right.
And so we still need estrogen.
Yeah.
We are living in a state of estrogen deficiency in postmenopause. And so the fat tissue is kind of like trying to take up a little bit of the lost reins.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. And is this accurate? When the environment in the body is now a higher proportion of androgens, testosterone, DHEA, then from a hormonal perspective, the body shifts more male from in a hormonal from a hormonal perspective.
In that perspective, absolutely.
And so then we see some things that we typically associate with more maleness in the traditional definition of thinning hairline, hair on the face, but also men typically distribute adipose tissue in the abdomen versus typically premenopausally women distribute it more in the hips and thighs. And so when women start to feel this sense of thickness in the middle, that's partly why there's the redistribution in that
for sure
area in particular.
And it's beyond the aesthetics of it, right? So like there's this uphill battle that postmenopause presents to trying to maintain a healthy body weight because of all these hormonal changes. And that shift to adiposity around the middle, that visceral fat, is associated with increased morbidity in women of that age. So really just like changes in metabolism, metabolic health, lipid profiles,
which can lead to cardiovascular
insulin
disease,
resistance,
diabetes,
and high blood pressure. So like all of these markers that we fell way behind men up until this point, we're now kind of on an even playing field. We're dying from cardiovascular disease at the same rate that men are.
As of postmenopause.
So it's not just the aesthetics of it. It has real far-reaching health implications, and there's things we can do about it.
There's things we can do.
Yeah.
But, and yet, to your point, like, and this is reinforcing my point and my story of I was so frustrated in that moment, not because I didn't understand why that woman was having that reaction or why so many women in the clinic were having that reaction. It's because not only are there more interesting things internally happening, but also there are more high stakes things happening internally that we want women to be learning about, paying attention to.
Right.
But the weight of, I shouldn't use the word weight in this conversation, but the
The
gravity of the aesthetic change kind of like outweighs some of the other things that we need to be helping women pay more attention to postmenopausal for their health. We're missing the point. Yeah. We're missing the point. Okay, so you were saying, what can we do?
Right. And so, like, you know, what we've been told our whole lives is like, just work out more and eat less. But that's not working.
No.
So, like, if the thing that you're doing isn't working, you have to change the approach.
Yes, I'm a believer in that. Like, I believe.
To keep doing the same thing over and over with the same results, that's a definition of insanity, right?
Right.
And the mainstay of this is strength training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this is, you know, something that I've spent the better part of the last decade physically doing with women in my my clinical practice and also in myself. But the things that I encounter as some barriers to it are just old belief systems around strength training.
Right. Is this safe?
Is this safe?
Okay for me to do?
Yes. Oh, too much weight. I don't want to push myself. I don't want to overdo it. That's what it is. I don't want to overdo it.
The scarier thing is not doing it. It's not moving those muscles.
Well, especially if we're talking to women about their bones degenerating and deteriorating and using all these like really scary words and phrases, then applying force commonsensically.
Right. Yes, that is a word.
Is it? Okay, great. Commonsensically, if somebody's telling you that you're fragile,
right,
you know, lifting up dumbbells is probably not the natural next thing to do.
Right.
And so a lot of what I do to move people towards more resistance training is undoing narratives that they have.
Right.
And there's great research coming out all the time on this, but it's protective to strength training.
Sure. And in terms of body weight specifically, like this actually has been studied. And commonsensically, this is going to make a lot of sense. So like this is going to seem obvious, but it's like, So the fat loss conversation has been studied around resistance training. So here's two groups. I'm going to ask you who you think lost more fat.
Oh, okay. Great.
So one group
I love a quiz.
Was randomized to calorie restriction alone.
Okay.
That was the intervention.
Dietary calorie restriction. Yes. Okay.
The other arm was calorie restriction plus resistance training. Who do you think lost more fat?
The resistance trainers,
absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah. And so that seems like the no-duh moment, right? But like, it's the no-does that are the simple things that make the most change that we neglect.
Right.
Right? It's like the obvious answer. And I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues recently. I work in an OBGYN office. And she was asking some questions about Reverend. She was getting really excited. And, you know, she was saying, I tell my patients all the time, like, you know, you need to lift weights, you need to strength train. And, you know, yet she does not strength train herself. And she's an OBGYN, right? So it's like, it's this obvious thing
that does not get prioritized.
That does not get prioritized. It's sort of cast aside as like an assumption or like, even like, oh yeah, I'll get to that someday when it matters more.
And you're talking about women who have spent the better part of their lives up to this point putting themselves on the back burner, being told that like to be a good mom I have to sacrifice everything about myself. And now they're in this phase of life where that's a habitual behavior, and they're still like nurturing energy out to all these places, and not, in this case, this woman's case, not necessarily seeing it as the priority that it needs to be.
And it does need to be.
It absolutely has to be. Yeah. And that's where, like, we're trying to see, we're asking our clients and each other all the time, like, what are the barriers?
What are the barriers? Yes.
And I think primarily it's don't know where to start.
Or how to start.
Or
don't
with
have
what.
The equipment.
You're right.
Don't have the time.
Yeah.
But the reality is you don't need much equipment. You don't. And everybody can make the time.
Right. And when we think about the amount of space of your basement where we have done robust strength training together, sometimes 3 of us down there.
Yeah.
You don't need a lot of space either.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that's important is initially it doesn't have to look like, you know, big plates on a bar.
Overhead squats.
Absolutely.
And deadlifts.
Yes.
No.
It could eventually. We hope it does.
Moving towards that.
Yes.
And like you had said recently, you said having a varied movement practice is great. It's really fun to have that
variety.
Variety. One of them has to be strength training.
100%.
It's non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable. I will not negotiate.
I will not.
We don't negotiate. My mom recently, she is following us in reverence, obviously, and she is 7 years old, and she saw some videos of us, I think this one was, doing overhead squats, and she was like, I can't identify with that. I feel way out of reach. And I get that. But what I was saying to her is like, well, of course you don't start there.
No.
Nicole has been strength training for 4 years, this seriously. 3 years, 3.5 years since Arlo was born.
Yeah, I mean, I took a pause.
Yeah,
postpartum, but I was training before.
Well, prior to me joining you, it didn't exist. We were born again.
No, it's true. I feel like my recovery from birthing Arlo was like, it sort of lit a new fire.
Yes.
To get really excited. And, part of that was born out of like, it was deep pandemic times.
Yes, it was.
I had a new baby. I can't like go gallivant in the mountains or go skiing or, I'm home. So I made, Levi and I both like made do with what space and time we had.
Right. And you started postpartum coming to see me and doing postpartum stuff.
With body weight.
Only body weight. And sometimes gravity eliminated body weight. So my point to my mom was like, of course it doesn't start there, but I know I see you as inspirational when I see how much you've progressed and how much you safely, comfortably, and I mean, not always comfortably. Sometimes working out is not meant to always be comfortable, but
in a safe way.
Yes. Yeah.
Protecting the
way
floor.
with integrity. For always protecting the pelvic floor.
Always.
But what I said to her is, Mom, what if you stretched your understanding of what fitness could look like for you even? I mean, there's lots of women out there in their elder years, 70s, 80s, that are, have social media following, that are lifting weight.
Right. And it's something to work towards.
So, and my mom had this moment of like, well, we can't do that. In her mind, she initially had this very conditioned reaction of like, we can never do that. So, like, I don't see myself in that video. And I just pushed her to think like, well, it doesn't have to look exactly like that. But why limit yourself? You respond to where your strength is, Absolutely. And we come in and out. Like sometimes, if we fall off a little, we have to start again from the weight we did 3 weeks ago or whatever. Yeah. And so it was just an interesting moment where she had this like, I'm conditioned to believe I don't belong in that space.
And the most important and also the hardest step is just simply starting.
Absolutely.
Like just making that first move to start. And then it's sort of just like, with hard work and consistency and effort, it sort of cascades.
Yeah.
And it becomes a little bit addictive. For me, at least.
Super healthy addiction.
Yes. Healthy addiction.
Yes. And yes, you're absolutely right. It is hard to start. And that's where we are trying to develop some really good, like science-based tools that can
build a healthy foundation.
Some resources.
A safe foundation.
They can really guide women, particularly in this age group, because they are forgotten in this space.
Right.
That can really guide them into like feeling comfortable, starting to move some weight and some resistance.
And some women of that age feel like, well, it's too late for me.
Yeah.
The ship has sailed, but never is that true. It's literally never too late. And yes, like it's the earlier we start building this practice, the better. And it still has such potential for such far-reaching benefits in our health span and lifespan, no matter what age.
Absolutely.
And it becomes all the more imperative post-menopause because of that loss of estrogen.
Absolutely. And in the PT world, there's always a movement around injury prevention. And this is, for me, the number one protective thing you can do.
Absolutely.
You are more vulnerable if you don't. So yeah, I think The other thing about weight distribution that's interesting is if you gain some, like we have that conversation, and I get a lot of feedback from women that are like, oh, I don't want to get bulky. You know that one with weight training?
I know that one.
So it's not a realistic concern just from a way you can target particular body areas. It's whatever your anatomical physique is, you will look like a stronger version of that. But I think the myth that if a woman strength trains, she's going to start looking masculine.
Maybe if it's your literal full-time job to lift weights, you have to spend so much time moving weight to even remotely approximate something adjacent to bodybuilding, right?
Right. But what is actually going to happen is with more tone in certain places, like your bum and your
lips.
Yes. So if you're actually worried about some of the redistribution of some of this weight, one way to address that is to feel the nice taut tension of muscles that have been strength trained. Your, shoulders will get more toned, which will visually narrow a waist.
Absolutely.
Is that our first goal? No, but there is aesthetic benefit, and that's real for a lot of women.
And to negate the aesthetics of it is really it can be shameful, right? Because it's okay to want to approximate a certain aesthetic,
right?
And to strive towards that.
Absolutely.
But to try and work towards some impossible ideal of a Barbie body, right? That's not
failure.
But wanting to like how we look,
how we feel,
is a powerful motivator.
Yes,
and it's not wrong.
It is not wrong.
No.
And it is one very legitimate catalyst towards motivation into this space. And I have it too. I feel like I look better in my clothes when I'm lifting.
And then it morphs into, I want to look better.
Yeah.
Oh, now I feel better.
Yeah.
And so the motivation for me getting into the gym every day is how I feel afterwards.
Right.
And how I feel because of it.
Right. And the truth of it is, whatever gets you there consistently,
we're
in favor of. For me, it's Nicole. Yeah. Consistently.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. There's nothing wrong with wanting to, strive towards feeling aesthetically better about yourself. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And so if the barrier for people is, I don't know how to start, I don't know what to do, this is too out of my league, we have an answer for that coming.
It's coming.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We're working on some really fun and exciting, some exciting resources.
Yeah.
And one of the important things that the threads we will carry through all of this is connecting with why in a meaningful way. So even if aesthetic pursuits are the motivation to get there, we, again, non-negotiable, we really want women to have a deeper and more integrated understanding of the impact of that action for themselves.
Right.
Like showing up for yourself in this way, you will likely feel better in your clothes. But showing up for yourself in this way may keep you from developing cardiovascular disease. Like, that's powerful.
Right. And to circle back on that too, it's because you're seeing changes in your body shape and weight, there's nothing inherently wrong about you. And this is a very universal, hormonally driven process of aging. And it's harder, but there are things we can do to feel healthy and be healthy.
Absolutely. Yeah. It exists, and we can let it exist and not let it throw us into hopelessness, but rather there are action items, actionable things that we can do to ride that wave a little bit.
Yeah.
But if we don't know about it, then it's very hard to accept it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.